Hello and welcome to NDA, the show where I, Dave Wiskus, argue with people who are creators or whatever about creator or whatever things. I am joined today by my friend. This is not the first time we've attempted this. We've attempted this many times, but today we're going to finish what we started. We're going to actually release this damn thing. Peter from Foreign Man in a Foreign Land. Peter, thank you for doing this multiple times now.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure to argue with you persnicketly. And this is absolutely a tribute. It was a tribute to probably the best podcast ever in history, as we all know. It's like Tenacious D.
We have the audio from that show, but okay, so what had happened was we were in the Bahamas together in one room, and we had cameras set up and the whole thing, but Mike, one of the producers over here, when he packed my gear, he didn't pack me any lights. So we just used the natural light that was coming in through the window of my hotel room, which looked great until the sun went down, which we would have noticed had we not been drinking wine the entire show. So like an hour and a half, 2 hours later, my wife comes into the room like, "Are you guys not done yet?" We're like, "Okay, we're wrapping up." We wrap up the thing and we take a look at the footage, and like the autofocus stopped working. That's how dark it was. The footage is completely unusable. You could almost like, I don't know, keyframe it across the timeline and rebalance it and have the video somewhat workable for lighting. But when it gets dark enough that the autofocus stops working, we're just screwed, man. There's nothing useful in there.
I mean, at the end of the recording, I was pretty much a locked Super Smash Bros. Like character at that point. Like there was just a silhouette of me.
It's funny because in the beginning, you had better contrast because it was a very bright white room, and I just sort of blended into the background. And by the end, it was so dark that I was the only thing that had any contrast, and it's just kind of a bummer that I wasn't white enough to act as a fill light on you.
I mean, the problem is that cameras can't handle different degrees of melanin in the same frame. So that's really the institutional racism that we could talk about on this podcast, because I think that's
institutional racism of light.
The light itself. Actually, no. It's Black History Month, so I can say this right now, hopefully. But yeah, no. I mean, cameras in Canon. Let's go with that. There's actually like a good argument behind that, in that it was exposed for a particular hue, and us people that are darker than blue are left out of the frame, metaphor and pun intended.
Well, is it systemic like that, or is it as simple as lighting different colors at the same time is tricky? Like exposing for different colors at the same time can be difficult.
It could be both. I think that it is a difficult task, but at the same time, I think that the priority wasn't there either.
You think that this is a solvable problem with technology in the camera?
At this point, definitely. At this point...
You're probably right. Yeah, you're probably right.
At this
camera
point...
sensors are good enough.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like we just had, and I'm sure that my learned colleague of Nebula, Jordan Howard, could talk about the camera... what word is it? The camera biases that exist in Face ID and stuff like that. It was able to track some faces better than others. So, I mean, there's a litany of different things that there we could get into, which actually I think is a great segue into the point, because Ruminations had it that you wanted to quibble with me with something semantic related.
What I don't remember what I wanted to argue with you about. We have attempted this show. We have scheduled it several times. We even recorded and filmed one, and yet here we are again. I don't remember what the hell we're supposed to talk about.
We're being censored by
your tweet.
Him himself. Oh yeah, my tweet. Oh yeah, that's
tweet.
Right.
Do we want to get right into this? I feel like we should keep I try to save the spicier stuff for later in the show, so that only the people who are invested enough in the conversation get there. Like that way, the first 10-minute people, they're not really into the show yet. It's the people at like the 30-minute mark. They're invested enough that I can trust that they'll get the nuance. And fuck it, I'll just get into it. So you had tweeted something that I found interesting and I disagree with, and I'll say that normally on this show, when I'm disagreeing with people, or if there's this spirit of debate, for lack of a better term, I don't really think of it in those terms, but like, it's all very creator economy centric. With this particular item, I think it's relevant to what you talk about on your show and the issues that you address as a creator, but the issue itself is not. And the tweet was, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something to the effect of people of color cannot be racist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you took issue with people, like you didn't understand how anyone could not agree with the sentiment that people of color cannot be racist.
I think I said something to the effect of, I didn't realize it was a controversial take to think or to posit that people of color cannot be racist.
And your follow-up, again, I'm doing this from memory. I have no notes here. I'm fully unprepared other than my own brain. It was something to the effect of, in order for there to be racism, there must be a power imbalance.
Absolutely. Historically, yes.
Tell me your thoughts on this.
So, yeah, if
defend yourself.
defend my views on racism as a black man in Black History Month for a white audience. That's it. That's my defense. No, but seriously,
now who's getting canceled? Jesus.
No, but in all honesty, I also don't want this to be taken out of context. This is the type of conversation that can be had in the company of people of whom there's a mutual trust. I adore Dave, not only because he makes me money, but I adore Dave. I know Dave's heart. And Dave would be the first to admit to his and potential past of microaggressions or whatnot. And that's the reason why
possibly
I feel
present if you're listening to the show.
And I think that's the reason why, like, I would feel safe having this type of conversation with you. With people, with randos on Twitter, not so much. That's why, like, I stopped replying to them. But essentially, in my prolix way of discussing it, racism is a social construct designed by white people, which also hot take, white people are not real. Basically, whiteness is not real. No, you're not white, Dave. Aren't you like German or some shit? Yeah.
I'm a light orangish pink.
You have a culture, is what I'm saying. You're German.
Do I?
Am I? As a don't you have like German heritage or some shit with that? The point that I'm making is
idea.
What you told me already. I'm not making this up. I'm not assuming that you're German.
No, I assume that the name Wiskus probably has German roots. I truly don't know where my family is from. I know
that's
back
the point.
Like 2 generations. But beyond that, I have no idea. I've never been interested.
And that's the point. That's what whiteness does. Whiteness robs you of your individuality and your culture. Racism is not only something that is weaponized against people of color. It is an instrument used by an oligarchy of people without hue, in this case, to categorize and subjugate people with hue. So historically, if you look at how it's been used, it can only be in a dynamic where it's a white person and a person of color. So the issue that we normally get into is where we get, and this is only with a subsect of people, but you sometimes have like white people claiming about reverse racism, or a person of color saying something to a white person that they don't like. There's a litany of different examples of which you have like black people saying something that white people don't like, and they're saying that it's reverse racism when really it's prejudice. What we're talking about is prejudice. So in the semantics of it, prejudice is when prejudice you could have against anybody. Prejudice is when one person holds a particular type of sentiment regarding another that isn't necessarily warranted or is assumed by stereotypes or what have you. Racism, in contrast, is in relation to power. It's in relation to one class of people having a historical subjugation of another class of people. So in regards with that tweet, No, white people are only racist, or they can only be racist to black people. Black people or people of color cannot be racist to white people because they don't have the socio-political power structure that allows for racism to exist.
There's a lot to unpack.
So much.
And I'm not an expert in, frankly, anything. And none of my opinions should ever be regarded as good or useful or emblematic or representative of anyone else's opinions or any opinions that anyone should ever have ever. All of that said, my thoughts on this are complex. Mm-hmm. While I am bright enough to stand out against the background here, the way I grew up, I was almost always the white kid in school. I grew up in predominantly Black and Hispanic schools. I lived in Southern California and in the suburbs of Denver. I didn't realize until much later in life that Denver is a very white city, because the specific areas of Denver that I lived in, like North Aurora, were not especially white, or not as white as the rest of Denver. And so being the white kid in school, or being like the white kid in my friend group as a kid, was not unusual. And so my perspective on this is not that of I was a poor subjugated white kid or something like that, but rather that, like, and I don't want to play the I don't see race game, because my family, especially like my grandfather, was super racist. I heard all sorts of terrible things, but I also didn't know how to contextualize them with the world that I saw. And when all of my friends were Black or Mexican, it was like I didn't process it. Like, I heard these things, but it wasn't what I saw or what I experienced. And so I just had this like internal cognitive dissonance of like, okay, these people say these things, and that's just things that people say. Which might be like one of the more insidious things about institutional racism, is that like you may not feel it, but it's okay that people say that, right? It's not until later in life, or until you like process things differently, you're like, oh, that was actually kind of fucked up that people ever said that at all. My experiences though are such, like, I have been picked on for being the white kid. It wasn't this horrible thing that I'm not able to get over or whatever. It wasn't a huge deal, but it certainly happened. And the systems that I grew up in, while I understand that at a larger level systemically, there's still a power imbalance, like in those relationships, in those dynamics, it wasn't quite the same thing. And I don't know that it is impossible for, I don't know that I agree that it's impossible for people of color to be racist to white people under that definition, because it is still possible to have power imbalance. It is still possible for there to be inequities in these relationships at different levels. So like if you are part of a culture that is largely of one ethnic group, and you are different, and the governments of that culture, the adults in the room, so to speak, of that culture, are of one ethnicity, and then you are a different culture coming in. I'm not saying white, but like of any other different ethnicity coming in, mm-hmm. How could there not be some kind of power imbalance?
Yeah. So, and first, I just still want to respond to the grandfather point. Everyone's grandfather is racist. So I mean, like that's like that, to his credit and his defense. But so there's definitely a lot to be said of malignment and marginalization on behalf of minorities. We're talking, let's stick to the US, or just for the sake of discussion, sticking to the US. There's definitely something to be had of minorities wielding the redistribution of social power, which is a newfound phenomena only in the past couple of years. And one could argue that it's a farce in any event, but you do have instances of which minorities take advantage of the fact that they are now, or it is in vogue to be progressive. It is in vogue to be accepting, inclusive, and cognizant of the horrors and local to the United States, the horrors of the way that America was built, chattel slavery and whatnot. So you do have some minorities that therefore understand that there's now some systemic backing and a very modicum of a redistribution of social power, and they weaponize that against some people. So in the case of like, if it's and let's also address this. I don't think that you would mind me saying this, but there's a relationship between both of us when it comes to class. So you came from a very impoverished class, and I came from a very upper middle class in the Bahamas. So there's this interesting dynamic that we have where I am marginalized in my own right, and you are as well. And we there's a bunch of different ways in which like we find solidarity in our experiences due to the fact that that class solidarity exists. Granted, if there were more wherewithal amongst us, more people would recognize that the poor white boy has a lot more in common with the marginalized black boy than the white boy has in common with the bourgeoisie.
This is why you and I, we should be working together to stick it to the man.
And that's why we do.
A lot of the dynamics of racism, especially in this country, or particularly in this country, almost exclusive. Well, that's not fair. Largely in this country, the way that race dynamics are played, I think is designed to ensure that people who are from where I'm from and people who are from where you're from are too busy arguing with each other or fighting with each other to realize like we both have a common enemy. And the enemy is not an ethnicity. The enemy is not a gender. Like we can say the man, we can say the white man. And these are like, at least from where I'm sitting, kind of jokey ways of addressing a thing. But I think the truth is that it's a system, and that system was built by people who largely looked like me. But to frame it as as being exclusively for and people who look like me only ever benefit from such a system is disingenuous and probably hurting a bigger conversation we could be having.
That's fair. To say that, to basically come to the agreement that given that you benefit from, we're talking about like white privilege in this case, given that you benefit from it, even though that you are not, and male privilege, exactly, straight male privilege as well, that you benefit more than I would from that system, and therefore that nullifies every other instance of prejudice, of malignment in different cases. I agree, that obfuscates like a lot of different progress. Now, to get back on course, because like I'll talk around it forever, the reason why racism in this case and the discussion that people of color cannot be racist is because historically and still to this day, we do lack the social and political capital necessary for racism. That's not to say that an individual person of color cannot use their power to marginalize a white person, to say that like someone like Obama cannot marginalize some of his, like a white working staff inside the White House, or even just a regular person, that would be farcical. And then we get into this semantic trap, as I would call it in this case, where we're saying, okay, well, Obama was in the White House. Of course, he has power. How can you say that black people or people of color cannot be racist if it's relating to that power?
Yeah, out of 46 presidents, one was a black guy, so everything must be equal now.
Precisely. And that's the point right there. You basically, no amount of newfound money in the black community in the United States will ever be able to hold a candle to the fire that is the institutional, historic, social, political malignment and violence that the United States was founded upon. So even when we do, and when I say we, like, let's say like Black Americans in this case, even when Black Americans or people of color gain some type of institutional power, that still is just a modicum in comparison to the legacy of, can't even say it, but white power that exists in the United States. So that's the reason why, like, and both of these things could be true at the same time. So what you were saying earlier about to say that white or black people can't be racist towards white people, even though they have power, negates the fact that there are cases of which black people are in positions of power and they can do a lot of harm to impoverished white folks, queer white folks, disabled white folks, all different classes of white folks. And that's real.
But that's also just assuming white folks are the target, which not necessarily where I'd go with that. I think that ultimately, and I don't want to jump straight to the end here, but ultimately, I agree with you within the framework that you set, with the way you define these terms and the way you posit your thesis. I agree with you. I think you're right. Where I take issue, and this took me a little while, because I'm reading a tweet, right? So like, what the fuck is that? What can I get out of that other than 280 characters at best? And I read white people can't be not people of color can't be racist. I'm just like, what does that mean? Of course they like what? And it took me a minute. It took me a minute to convince myself that I have no business responding to that tweet, because like that is not the place, my friend. That's not a conversation I can enter into in a public forum and come out clean. Who knows if I can even do it here? But that is not the Twitter is not the time or place for nuance.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't going to work out well for anybody. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my issue was not with what you meant. And I didn't even know that I would say I have an issue. What do I care? But what I find interesting is that I think the disconnect is between not your ideology and mine. I don't think we're disconnected at all. I think that ultimately where I was confused was that you were using a term in a different way than I think the people who are on the other side of that issue are using the term. And as so often happens on the internet, the nuance is lost, and we end up with you are either on this side of a thing or on this side of a thing. And let's tie this up in a creator economy package. A current example of this is the discussion over whether or not Jimmy, MrBeast, helping cure blind people is good or bad. And that is a conversation happening on the internet, on Twitter and in Discords and Slack channels about, is it the case that he is glorifying poverty tourism? Is it inherently ableist to cure blind people and not accept them for who they are, which is a take I've seen? Or is it true that he is unfairly maligned and he is just a guy trying to help people? Like, what is it wrong to try to help people? And where I get frustrated with that is like, if you try to say that the act itself, or if you try to point to him and say this video bad, then it's really easy for people who want to defend him to say, well, that's an insane perspective. He's just trying to help people. So therefore everything he does must be good. And I can see this little microcosm of how we end up in these political situations where it is so easy for either side to frame the other side's arguments as irrational, invalid, insane. If you are a Jimmy fan, your position is anyone who thinks this video is bad must be an insane person because all he's trying to do is help blind people. What the fuck is wrong with you? If you are concerned about the glorification of billionaires and you are concerned about poverty tourism and people weaponizing the disadvantages and marginalization of others for their own benefit, then it is fair to see this as just another example of that evil. But if neither side is thinking about it critically and evaluating the entirety of the situation and taking into account the other side's perspective, then of course you're going to end up with this bonkers ass false dichotomy. And I'm going off here, but my point is, I think that what I was having that momentary reaction to was that you're using the word racist or racism in a context that is different from what I'm used to that word meaning. And so my reaction is to a difference in the definition. And I think that's interesting.
Okay, I see. I see what you're saying. It's and there has to be something to be said about the space and the medium of which it's made. That statement is made.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about it earlier, and just like Twitter as a space is algorithmically and also by design something that allows, facilitates, rewards, and incentivizes hot takes. It incentivizes the football match of two teams or three teams or just like different people. They will show a MrBeast thumbnail to a person that does not like a person like me that is in consumption, is trying to attack or trying to dismantle these systems of things like poverty tourism, of things like, oh, you indigent little child in Ethiopia, please show me your ribs and let me zoom in on the camera so I could talk about how poor you are, like shoving a microphone in like a small Ethiopian guy's kid and like just said, hey, tell me about your poverty, tell me about like your everything like that.
For just 70 cents a day, you could feed the starving child.
I mean, what's the guy that passed away, unfortunately? Oh God, that basically would do things like that. Anyway, I'm getting off point. The point is that the algorithm would like to, and when I say the algorithm, this is this mystical figure. And
Todd?
Let's try to not Todd in this case, but I guess Musk. But yeah, algorithms all over. Their interest is to keep people on the platform. And one of the things that gets people on the platform more than, things that make them happy are things that make them horrified or things that make them angry. And that's why they will show a tweet that is antipodal to your worldview in order to incense you so that you can engage with that, which is actually extremely fascinating. I do believe that happens. You don't agree?
No, I'm just thinking about that as a sentence.
Yeah, but
just processing.
You look off into the distance. That's assuming what I thought. But in also just like a quick aside onto MrBeast, and this isn't a hot take at all. Jimmy,
well, it's supposed to be a creator economy show, so like go off.
Yeah, definitely.
That's probably more on topic for the audience, but
than a tweet about racism. Well, when I saw that thumbnail of MrBeast with his hand on a child's shoulder.
Bad. It's standing behind the kid in a hospital with that
and
creepy
smiling,
smile.
This mirth, like you could smell the formaldehyde of the hospital in the thumbnail. And he's right there like, I'm just like, my man, come on now, my man, please, Jimmy. And yeah, it's that picture right there. And Jimmy is a whiz, is literally probably the best when it comes to optimizing for clicks, for retention, everything like that. So
attention,
I find
it worked. This one definitely got the attention.
It got people talking, but not for the reasons that I think that he wanted, because of the way that he followed up. But who knows? It might be extremely diabolical.
Is there? I don't know. Nobody's ever really canceled. Not really. Not. All it does is allow people to entrench themselves into parasocial relationships in these cases. And I think for Jimmy, people who disliked him are now more aware of him, and people who liked him are now more in love with him. So like,
that's true.
There's no losing move. And if he's smart, he can take advantage of that, capitalize on it. I'm not saying that was his intent. I really don't think it was. But like, no bad press, man.
Yeah, and in this case, it definitely shows that like he reached into spheres that he normally wouldn't. My criticism of the video is initially, of course, a thumbnail. It's a thumbnail in poor taste. It might be an effective thumbnail, but it's a thumbnail in poor taste. And then the video itself, I haven't watched that one. It's not my cup of tea. But I think that people that are criticizing Jimmy are unfortunately missing the forest for the trees in this case. The problem isn't Jimmy doing this. The problem is that the system that we live in allows, and not only allows, but purposefully has created a disparity of wealth and resources and opportunity to the point where someone can go without such a corrective surgery that will increase the margin of their quality of life immensely. And you need some white kid from North Carolina to spend his copious amounts of profligate wealth in order to assuage that system. And that's the disgust in it. And I think that people, and not just people in this case, but I think that people in general get mad at the wrong things. We're constantly in a situation where we are marginalized and power is being stripped and rendered from us. So we can't attack the system. We could shake our skinny fist to the sky at, the White House, but we can't necessarily attack it. I mean, unless it's January 6th. But you can't attack a system in that regard, right? So it's easier to attack people. It's easier to look at Jimmy and be all like, you bad, you white cis man bad. You're not going to get that much, especially right now. You will get applauded in a lot of circles for that. But it's a lot more difficult, a lot more nuanced, however, a lot more productive to agitate the system and say, why is it that MrBeast has to do this, or is in a position to even do this? Why is it that he can do that? Go for it.
It is so easy to wear our opinions the way that you would wear your team's colors. When you go on Twitter and you say Jimmy bad, it's not really you letting people know or you trying to spread a message. And certainly he's not going to see it. MrBeast wrong. It's what you're doing is you're trying to telegraph to your circle that you belong to them. You are part of that group. This is its own form of tribalism. And that's fine. We talk, there's, I shouldn't say we, I'm not sure we use this. People will use the term virtue signaling, which is a real thing. And it's not even inherently bad. Letting others know where you stand on an issue is virtue signaling. It's also usually a good idea. The trouble with Twitter or social media is so many of us tweet as if we're headlining Coachella. And we have this image in our heads that there's an audience out there hanging on our every words when, spoiler alert, nobody gives two shits what we have to say. It's just this cacophony of bullshit. There's no way that your opinion can matter or break out of that cacophony unless it is spicy. Unless you have a spicy hot take, then they'll elevate a little bit. And so what might be, wow, that video might be a little bit in poor taste. Yikes. Instead becomes, this is a problem because of the patriarchy and and you're like, what the fuck? It's a dude trying to help blind kids. And sure, there's problems. And I posted this on Twitter where everybody hangs on my every word, but there are a million things that you can and honestly should criticize MrBeast for. Helping blind people is not one of them. The way he goes about doing it, maybe we can talk about how on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe he landed at a 7. But to treat it as if it's either perfect, you're either a demon or an angel, is ridiculous. And to approach it in those terms, I don't know how you can live your life like that. Could he have done more with his platform to point out that the system is broken and these people shouldn't have needed him? Sure. Does he have a responsibility? Arguably, yes, but that's debatable. Is he a monster for making a video and helping? Of course not. That's not a reasonable take. That's not a reasonable way to feel. And when we take these stances, I don't think it's really about we feel that way. I think it's about trying to tell other people like, oh no, I'm in this group. I'm a good person. Everyone knows I'm good, right? We all agree I'm a good person. Okay, cool. As long as we know that, then I'm okay. And I think that where we end up, I'm going to tie this back up. When we end up in conversations about whether or not groups of people can be racist, I don't think that you and I disagree. And I think that me responding on Twitter would have been like, oh shit, they're going to fight and it's going to be a whole thing and there's going to be people on sides. One of us probably gets canceled. And it's just kind of a bad time for all of us. Here's how I think that goes down. I think I reply to you we like trade a couple of jokes on Twitter, knowing each other, and then other people out there in the world make a bunch of assumptions about that conversation, about our relationship. And while you and I are like giggling behind the scenes, the rest of the world is like, that guy, he did a terrible thing, because there's no room for nuance in that conversation, which is why it's way more interesting to talk about this here. How is it possible then to have these conversations about anything important without it devolving into sports teams?
Well, that's a harking to my political science masters now. That's a question, political participation in the polis. The polis is this term of which politics occur, and it's a public thing. If you look at the separation of the different ways of the spheres where politics happens, it's the public and the things that like are supposed to be in the private sphere. If you're looking at a Venn diagram, this is me illustrating a Venn diagram poorly. In the private sphere, that's
imagine
where you
if
love.
you will.
Imagine if you will. Take a gander. A circle of public and a circle of private. And in the private, you have your religion, what you love, your fetishes, all of these other things. In the public, you have politics. And the reason, these are things that are supposed to be separate. However, of course, we know often too well, if we've ever read Calvin, that those things don't end up being not separate. So you have this thing in the middle, which is called the social. It's an idea put forth by Hannah Arendt, probably one of my favorite political scientists. And the thing is, the public is supposed to be this space of which discussion about, because essentially what's happening inside Twitter right now, that is politics. Like whether you want to believe it or not, these tweets in the discourse, it is politics. It is the way that we're doing it right now, the modern, updated, and in many ways bastardized version of politics. No longer people meeting in the town square to discuss their takes on, different things that govern their lives. They are going to Twitter and they're putting out hot takes. But that's the problem. You see, the motivation behind it is wrong now. No longer are we trying to figure out, I don't think that anybody on Twitter for the most part is tweeting to engender a better world for them to live in. They're engendering, or they're tweeting because they want engagement. They want likes, they want follows. And in order to do that, they want clout. And rarely enough does well-meaning discourse actually result in engagement, unfortunately. A harmonious discussion that we could have had that's nuanced, filled with laugh, wholehearted stuff, agreements, non-fiery language, that's not going to do well. But if you post something that's fiery, it may. So the question is, how do you get back to the polis? That's essentially what you're asking. How do you get back to a situation where we have discussion and discourse that is agitating the current status quo in search of something better or progress? And I agree with you in this case, because I believe that the smartphone has killed that. The social media systems that we have has kind of killed that in many different ways. And I honestly am very pessimistic if we will be able to get to a point where we are able to discuss things in a non-incendiary way, especially online. Because the things that we discuss online especially are not the same. It doesn't have the same vehement. We talked about this in person, and it was not the fiery debate that it could have been maybe on Twitter. The things that we talked about, I don't know if you want to get into that, but we talked about stuff like fat phobia or anti-fatness, and it was a nuance back and forth. It had a varying degrees of perspectives, and at the end, we went and we got something to eat, and we laughed.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen on Twitter.
Literally, that's not even figure of speech. Like, we literally went and got food after that. And I think that is when you know somebody, like when it's a human being that you have to keep talking to after the argument, you simply discuss these things differently, unless you're an irrational jackass, I guess. I mean, there are certainly like American Thanksgiving can often be like arguing with family members, but there's not like the level of consequence there. I think that even then it comes out of this, we now exist in a world where there is we make consequence-free declarations of our opinions, where We can find our tribes on the internet where I might, not me, but like one might go into a room on the internet 20, 30 years ago and say something kind of racist, and other people socially would be in a position to say, hey, that's kind of a fucked up racist thing to say. You shouldn't say that. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll keep that to myself now. And the Nazis stayed hidden. Now it is possible for someone who feels these things and has these thoughts in their heart to go into a room and say something kind of racist, and the other people might jump in and say, hey, that's kind of racist. But you're not even halfway there. It's actually way worse. The black people did all these terrible things, and they're holding you to, and the Jews and the things and and like, you know what? That person's right. We should hate more people. And you can end up going down this rabbit hole of, you were 5% racist and now you're 80% racist. You were 3% anti-Semitic and now you're 90% anti-Semitic. And it becomes just more and more, the goalpost of what is too much just keeps moving further and further away. And then when you enter into a real life conversation, you're not talking to a real person anymore. You're talking to the internet, the way you would talk to the internet, and you're expecting to get the feedback. And if you don't, well, then you must be the enemy that me and all of my other bonkers ass, racist, anti-Semitic, misogynist, anti-trans, whatever people were sitting around saying. Now you're the person we were talking about that whole time. And these fake communities of hate echo chamber turn into we can't have real conversations anymore. But when it's somebody you know, and we're talking about, in the case of the conversation we had before, we're talking about Darren Aronofsky's The Whale and whether or not the movie is fat phobic and what that even means. And I don't know if it's worth going all the way down that rabbit hole, but at the end of that conversation, you and I are heading downstairs to hit up a restaurant and grab some food. We have a working relationship. You are a friend of mine. So it's not like I can just be upset at you about this thing. We can't take these extreme positions with no room with no room for the other person's opinion. And I miss that.
Yeah.
I miss that on the internet.
Was it ever a thing on the internet?
Oh yeah. There were certainly trolls, but they were called out for being such. If you went into a room saying racist things, here's a crazy one. A long time ago, I would get into Usenet arguments with comedians, one of whom was Joe Rogan, about different types of issues. And it was, even in those rooms, it was people taking positions, but in a way that they were still kind of performing, and everyone else knew that it was a performance. Like, I'm going to play the character of a person who feels this more strongly than I do. And you'd get into what we called at the time flame wars, but at the end of the day, you knew that you're arguing with a caricature of a person, not a real person. And then time goes by and that caricature becomes the person, not just in those particular groups, or not just Joe Rogan, who I'm not going to pretend I know the guy, but, argued with him on the internet once or twice. Years go by, and a person who's been doing that for so long, as the internet develops, as online communities develop, and the echo chambers come into existence, it is easier and easier for a person with entrenched beliefs to be supported. When you are only surrounded by validation, the only direction you can grow is your own instincts. If all you ever get is a yes, the only growth you're going to experience is whatever your impulses are. Only your id can grow. And, this is where we are now.
Yeah, no, that's a great illustration of it. I mean, the point of it is that when you have this sycophantic echo chamber around you, you get more radicalized in either direction. And I think also the way that we agitate for people that have crossed the line or has offended someone, I think the way that we agitate for it is also ineffective and also not the right way to do it. I think that our understanding of accountability needs work. going to hold someone for a public pillory for them saying something transphobic, or for them, like if the roles were reversed and someone tried to put me in the pillory for saying that white people, people of color can't be racist. If someone took me to task and said, you know what, Peter, you really did it this time. You went too far. What does the retribution look like? What is that situation remedied? How does it look? Does it look like me losing my platform and me not being able to feed myself? Does it look like me not getting any views further on? Is that what you want? And if that's the case, then why? Why are you a jail, essentially? Why are you the carceral system at this point? Because that's essentially what you are. You're not trying to, and this also goes for people like myself that are, unironically social justice warriors at this point. When we agitate for change, the way that we're going about it, harking back to this tweet that I just did a whole video on about the left doesn't do anything for men. Essentially, it just, I'm paraphrasing, but they basically said that we're punishing men in these leftist spaces and we don't have any useful advice for them. To which, that's one, absolutely not true, but two, the sentiment of that is something that resonates with me. As a cishet man that has come from a very conservative background, and like the Caribbean is like conservatism on steroids in many different ways. And I know what it's like to be in that position. And in many ways, I still am in those positions of bigotry. Like the reason why I'm on Nebula in the first place is because you saw my video combating Caribbean homophobia. And the one thing that you told me to basically just speak for you at this point is just like, we need more situations, or we need more creators that are willing to not act as though or perform perfection of their takes and say that they have arrived to that destination already of political correctness or progressiveness, but to show the trek, show the journey, show the ugly parts of it. And that's me. All I show is the ugly parts, actually, because that's, one, it's a better story. Like if I'm just talking like flowery about myself, it's not a good idea. And two, I'm accounting for whatever is in my past that someone is going to be able to wield as in the court of public opinion and just say, Foreign did something when he was 13 and it offends me in 2023. And we need to cancel him future as well. Like not only Foreign right now, but Foreign in the future needs to be canceled for something that Foreign said when he was 13. That's not effective. That is actually what we do right now, publicly pillorying people. That's a alliteration. In order to not only virtue signal to others, but also to punish people. It's not to remedy or hold them accountable. It's punishment. And we really need to begin to think about like how better we can get about accountability and what exactly does it look like and what does it do?
And what is accountability for? Like I went through an exercise maybe a year ago where I don't know, I've been on Twitter since 2007. My Twitter account is old enough to drive. And I am sure that in the last 16 years, I've probably changed a little bit. And I've probably said some dumb shit along the way. And I'm going back through, I'm just going through like, oh, delete that. And some of them were just like, that might not be the most productive way of framing a conversation, or that was, you got to understand that in the earliest days that when you go to twitter.com, it was a prompt that said, what are you doing? So like a lot of my earliest tweets were like, having a sandwich, which like who today, with the way we think of Twitter today, 16, 17 years later, well, nobody cares that you're eating a sandwich. There's still some people who tweet like that, but that isn't the way you would use. It's not a way a person would typically use the platform now. So some of it was just deleting old, dumb shit like that. And some of them were just like, I was trying to be funny, or I was using terms that I know now that you're not supposed to use, but at the time it had not quite come into consciousness that you're not supposed to use those terms. I kind of want to share one here, but I'm afraid that I'm going to get full on canceled for it.
I mean, it's at this point in the podcast where I think that the sycophants are the only ones watching. So I think you'll be fine.
I'll avoid using the word out of sensitivity. But the tweet was something to the effect of like, all jokes aside, can R word vote? And I read that and I have to laugh because like, wow, I thought that was okay to say. There's a point in my past in the year 2008 where I thought that was an okay thing to type and hit send.
It was okay to say. In many places, it still is okay to say.
Yes, and that context is important. But like when we now live in an age where there's certain episodes of 30 Rock or Community that you can't see anymore because characters mocking blackface were in blackface, and that context doesn't matter. The fact that they did it means the show can't be seen anymore. The nuance is gone. We can't have a real conversation about this anymore. So it can't be accepted that like at that time making fun of these issues and using that as a tool to bring up and discuss this stuff was interesting and valid and whatever. I wasn't using that word because I thought this is totally okay to say. I was using that word because it was a little bit edgy, but not full on. You're ostracized from the community. Like it's enough to get like a little bit of a laugh out of it, like in a comedy club sort of setting, but not you're an awful person, we're going to cancel you. Because this was long before people got canceled for anything. The view of the world then, that is a term that it wasn't anyone's favorite word. There were certainly arguments against using it. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't ignorant of that. I was just willing to push that boundary a little bit. Side note, I've since looked it up, and yes, people who are mentally disabled still get to vote. It was a genuine question at the time. I was curious, but I was trying to frame it as like, what's the funniest way I could say this? And that it was dumb. And of course, I look back at that and I'm horrified. And I can either sweep that, like delete the tweet, sweep it under the rug, pretend it never happened. Or I can address it in a conversation like this, pointing it out, saying like, we need to acknowledge the worse past versions of ourselves if there's any validity to that growth and that change. In the same way that if you're in an echo chamber, the only part of you that can grow is your id, I don't want to be in a place where I cannot grow with my own accountability. I want to make sure that if I've said dumb things, I can own that and grow past it. Like I'm going to, as a person, I think all of us do, but speaking only for myself, like I need that scar tissue. If I don't have the scar tissue of I said dumb thing and now I understand why that was bad, I don't feel like I've made any progress. So watching your video about your past with feeling or thinking or saying homophobic things, to me, that's empowering. That empowers me to own my own past and confront it rather than try to pretend it didn't happen.
Absolutely, and that's what I want, and that's actually, I think my calling card at this point, because people in those comments, they said, okay, I'm not homophobic, but like I, as a trans person, have expressed racism in my past or racism right now. And this helped me come to grips with that. So people are vicariously living through my attempt at taking accountability for things, which is something that I could gift to others. And I said, okay, this is something that I would like to do. It just goes to show extremely how invested our own language is in bigotry and in malignment, and how even our very language is a part of the system that we belong to that harms people. There's a bunch of things that we say on a regular basis that has, very awful roots. I one of the things that like a lot of my audience didn't realize is the term peanut gallery. In the spirit of Black History Month, peanut gallery is a racist term. It is in reference to, it's specifically speaking to the Black people that used to occupy the cheaper seats. People of poor class used to be in the peanut gallery, and those were people, they were Black people. So when you're saying that, oh, the peanut gallery is talking again, you're referring to these Black people of lesser means. it's a term. There's a bunch of terms, like even like saying something like, oh, they have me. The one that I hear even Black people saying, you're being uppity. I think like some people may know about that, but uppity is in reference to Black slaves when they were on the plantation, and mostly in reference to those in the house, in the plantations, because they were of lighter skin and they became a little sedity. I don't know if it's a term that people use on a regular basis. Sedity means kind of how can I say, arrogant or conceited with themselves because they weren't on the field, they were inside the house. So they called them uppity. It's in reference to, the full thing is, you uppity Negro. There's a lot of different terms that are used on a regular basis that we still don't realize how deeply entrenched they are in ostracizing and othering some people, and in a way bolstering another. And I think that the best thing to refute that is to take accountability for that, is to acknowledge the fact that, listen, it is extremely hard work to be on a journey to shelve yourself, to decolonize your mind, to shelve your bigotry. And people who perform that they've already reached there are probably people that you shouldn't trust that they've actually reached there. I far more trust the person, like when you said like, oh, like this isn't something that like your racist past isn't a past, like on a regular basis, like you have microaggressions. I expect you to say that because, like I say, I know you, and I know that you are on a, like, it's a journey, it's not a destination. You are on an everyday basis auditing yourself to say, okay, like, let me talk about this. I have to talk about this. So basically, Dave's wife, Yulia, of whom I adore, is from Russia, hails from Russia. And we're discussing, I'm not too sure. Oh, we're discussing the origin of my name. As many people know,
we're discussing what to call you, because we were in your home. We were in Nassau. So it was like, and colloquially, like as a nickname, because of your channel, like the way that we call Sam from Wendover Wendy, people call you foreign. But that's a word that doesn't make a ton of sense when like we're all the foreigners and we're actually in your country, in your city, in your home. So foreign doesn't make any sense. And somebody, maybe me, was like, maybe we should call you local. And you're like, nope, that has other issues.
And then Yulia butts in, and I adore Yulia yet again. And she's just like, what if we call you homie? And
she didn't know. She didn't know. This is not, that's not a part of American culture she's been exposed to, really. She didn't know.
And like literally, she, like, I start laughing like raucously. And I console her also because like she's like turning red and she's just like, wait, what happened? And it's obvious at that point that like, and I tell her, I was just like, okay, if you didn't have like a thick Russian accent and instead you had a Valley Girl accent, I may have been offended. But
had it not been so obvious that she didn't mean the thing that she just said, I think that would have played very differently.
And then immediately, like I call her Julia and I lose the upper hand.
It was so great because like we're like, oh, is it local? Nope, that's a problem. Towny? Nope, that doesn't work either. And she's like, maybe homie. And she's just thinking home, E. That's it. They're just making home into a cute thing, not realizing that there's this whole other. And so we like take the moment to explain, like, here's culturally why that's a thing, and white people will try to address Black people using this sort of vernacular, and it's kind of condescending, and there's this. And then you were like, oh, I'm never going to let you forget this. This is too funny. This is going to be a thing forever. And then immediately referred to her as Julia. And it's like, oh, you lost the high ground so fast. I don't think I've ever seen anyone lose the high ground that quickly before.
The tables turned immensely. But it just goes to show, like, and that's a good point. Like, it's about intent. You know what I said? Like, it's really about like, what is the context and the intention of these different silhouettes of situations. And I think we've lost intent. I think we've lost context. I think we've lost nuance in a lot of these cases. It's one of the reasons why, like, I like to send voice notes instead of text, and I haphazardly would do that inside of the Slack and abuse Slack etiquette by sending voice notes inside of a chat room with so many.
I'm never going to listen to that.
But it's cultural. But that goes to show, like, I want you to get my tone. I want you to hear that I'm being jocular, and we've lost that, and I miss that. And I think I optimistically, to end it on a more optimistic note, I think we're going back to some of those things. I think that we're longing for physical events, which is why, like, I love, like, what Nebula is doing. I was talking earlier about how the Prince is this physical event, how jet lag, had, like, jet lag may in the future, maybe, I don't know, can we even talk about, like, it may be in a physical place at some point, or like Patrick Willems.
Yeah, Eric, we did. Night of the Coconut had a premiere. No, you're correct. Night of the Coconut had a premiere. Jet Lag had a premiere. The Prince has its premiere in 2 days. As of the time of this recording, today's Monday, so Wednesday is the premiere.
But that's the excellent part. Like, I mean, the physical events, it shows this demand for wanting to get in person, beyond the parasocial. Yeah. And getting away from these social limitations of Twitter, of TikTok and everything, like, where you just lose so much. You want to be able to experience it in person. And I think it signifies this time for harking for, like, something a little bit more personal. And that's even what we're trying to do with YouTube. I mean, the reason why, like, influencer marketing is going so much is because go long are the days where commercials would thrive and get all kind of conversions because it's, I don't know, Tom Cruise inside there, because people know that Tom Cruise is an actor. They don't know if he's acting. However, if you put a YouTuber next to your favorite product, the people that watch that YouTuber and have bonded with them for so long, they're far more likely to convert. And a lot of companies are realizing that. And that's the reason why, like, this personal relationship is so important to the creator economy at this point.
Well, I think that the relationship, we have a responsibility. You or I, to an extent, I guess, with a show like this, and all of the creators that we work with, all the folks in this community, anyone with an audience, we have a little bit of a responsibility to we're responsible for the things that we say. We're responsible for the things that we do in public. And when we know that tens or hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions or tens or hundreds of millions of people are watching us and to one degree or another looking up to us, if we know that people will go sign up for, whatever service because we say so, because we talk about it, what does that tell us about what people will do if we say things like, you know what, maybe hating women isn't such a bad thing, even in subtle ways? We're now selling that message parasocially. We're now selling that as a thing you can do. And I think it's important, call it virtue signaling, but one of the things that I do often on this show is I will go out of my way, as I do when I'm talking to creators behind the scenes. I'll go out of my way to telegraph my intentions. Not because I want to be revered as being woke enough, or not because, hey guys, I'm just an ally. Like, I don't want credit. What I want is to acknowledge that I have influence. I may not have the same kind of on-camera influence that somebody like Brian from Real Engineering or Legal Eagle or Lindsay Ellis or whomever. I may not have that kind of influence, but behind the scenes, I do have real influence. And as I have built and as we have built this community, one of the more important things that I need to recognize is the example that I set, even when I'm not thinking about setting an example. So when the CEO or the person in charge of the thing is willing to stand up and say, I screwed up, I accidentally did a racism, or I accidentally did a, whatever micro or even macro aggression I've committed, by owning that, I can telegraph to the room that it is okay to own that. We need examples of people, like the example I saw in you in that first video of yours that I saw. We need examples of people taking ownership of their flaws so that we can grow. I worry about the loss of sincerity on social media. And my hope is that people who make things on YouTube, as we thoughtfully dissect, there's enough room in a 4-hour Jesse Gender video to thoughtfully analyze something without just saying thing bad or thing good and drawing these imaginary lines across which one must either straddle or evade in order to be the person that they imagine themselves to be. And so ultimately, what I want is for conversations like this. Now, I don't literally mean you and I on a call, but conversations that we have with our audiences. I want for those conversations to mean something. I want for community to mean something. And I think we have a real chance. And I literally mean we, you, me, all of the people within this community. We have a real chance. Anyone with a voice has a real chance to inspire others to be better in small ways. If we don't have that responsibility, then what is the price of the success?
And that is, and it may sound trite or prosaic and mawkish to say, but like I do believe that, and it's one of the reasons why I adore Nebula. And I think that one thing that is binding a Nebula creator at this point, they brand it as this elusive smart mafia, but really what it is a coterie of people, weirdly amongst all of these different disciplines, but the theme, the thread that filigranes us all together is, I don't want to give you too much credit because your head is huge, but the example that you set, okay, it's acceptable for us to atone for our wrongdoing and the things that we've done by making accountability for it. You've also shown what won't be tolerated, and you've shown what would. And that shows with every creator that is in Nebula. And we talked about this before. You said that this might be a question that we might discuss, but what makes a Nebula creator at this point? And I think that one of the things that I noticed, and I will say, weirdly enough, and there's not many spaces that I can say this about, but Nebula is the safest I've ever felt around white people in my life. It's the safest like I've ever felt, because and like too. I'm not being paid to say that. I'm being paid to say other things, but not that. And I mean that because in many different my tertiary education is in Iowa, of all places. So I've been around a lot of white people. And Nebula is one of the places, even in person, where I have felt extremely safe. And I think that's due to the type of people that are on Nebula. Varying degrees of progressiveness and inclusivity. But at the same time, there are these boundaries that I think that we all tacitly understand. And this commitment to progress, not only in our own content, but in our own lives. Like when I talk with Rowan from Midlife Crisis, and we have like a long thread in the DMs about longevity science because I fast 20 hours a day and I learned from his Nebula video that he used to fast. That's an amazing amount of camaraderie that me, a Black guy from the Bahamas, and Rowan, a brown guy in the UK that practices medicine, that's something that rarely, it's an oddity, it's an anomaly. Like you don't really find that much. It's beautiful. You could turn on the Nebula app, and that's what I do more times than not. And I just say, okay, I'll just pick on a random video. And the curation system actually lends well to that. Thank you very much, Eric and PJ and all the rest that do that, because it puts me in front of people that I would not normally watch. And that goes to show, like, a Nebula creator, regardless of their discipline, is not only adept in that discipline and in that field, but they also have a particular thread of commitment to being progressive and accepting of a myriad of different experiences. I think that I can say that safely for the majority of people that I've run into in Nebula.
I sometimes joke that if society ended and you needed to rebuild it, the collection of creators that we have would probably be a great starting point. We've got doctors, we've got scientists, we've got engineers, we've got logistics people, like anything that you'd need to restart a society. We got that shit covered. I think yes to all of that. I think that the thing that I take very seriously is, I don't remember. I don't know if you remember. We had here in America, we had an election back in 2016 that didn't go super well for
Might
a
have
lot
heard
of
about
folks. Yeah. Who was it? Somebody. I want to say.
I think he was on
maybe
The Apprentice.
So it might have been Hillary who said, I'm gonna misattribute this quote, but it was like, integrity matters, character matters. And watching that stuff play out while I was like at the beginning of my relationship of my with my now wife, who is from Russia and she like fresh off the boat, right? And so her perspective on the world and seeing all of these issues through her eyes while I'm watching all this crazy Trump shit play out in the election cycle, and thinking about things like character and integrity. It is not a coincidence that this company started in 2017. It was a reaction to, what privilege do I have? How do I need to spend my privilege differently? How can I maintain accountability for how I spend my privilege? And I spent from the election on maybe 6 months trying to figure this out, and finally landed on an answer and started building this. Which is to say that it's not about me. I realize I'm the host of the show, I'm the CEO, and it is easy to come back to talking about Nebula, Standard, and the thing in this environment. But to me, what's magical about it is that it starts with me going, okay, how do I do this? And then I turn to my friends. I turn to people I know in the space who I trust to have character and integrity. And I say, help me build this. Help me do this. And then as I get more of those people in, they earn the trust of others. And you keep bringing more and more trustworthy people into the thing. It has long since stopped being about me or my ideology or my vision. And it is now like a collection of people who feel the same way or have the same philosophical dreams without necessarily agreeing on the details at all times. And my job is much more curator than it is architect. I am here to listen to all of these people and try to build a system with and for them that helps to better accomplish these things. But it is not about me. I don't want it to be about me. I'm trying to be less and less involved in these things. But the reason I think that it works as well as it does, and the reason why I enjoy this community so much, there is an expectation, or an assumption rather. There's an assumption from the outside that this community or Nebula or the creators we support, that there is like a liberal agenda, a leftist agenda. When you look and you see JT, Second Thought, doing the new F word, or making videos called how to make communist propaganda, it is easy to see that and make assumptions. It is easy to look at Simon Clark making climate change videos and make assumptions. What people don't realize, behind the scenes, a number of our creators go to church every Sunday and get up and speak and are very conservative. There are members of our community who have very differing opinions on things like trans issues or on other types of LGBTQ issues, or don't have the same perspective as what you might assume the collective does. We have a number of creators who are white male conservative Christians. They just don't make content promoting those ideals. They don't make videos telling you climate change bad because they don't believe climate change is bad. It is possible. This is going to shock some people, but it is possible to be fiscally or even socially conservative and also think that science is probably a good idea. Mm-hmm. And these false dichotomies of politics or political affiliation as sportswear leads us to believe that if you are conservative, you must be an absolute idiot. You must be evil. And that simply isn't true. It's never been true. And if you know people, if you have people in your life who are not immediately within your echo chamber, you probably know people who have a different perspective on this one issue, but with whom you agree on the other 99 issues on the table. That's very common. I think it's good and it's healthy. And behind the scenes, we have debates all the time about various political issues. We have constructive conversations all the time. I have private conversations with lots of people who are like, hey, this thing being discussed in the chat room right now, I don't feel like there's room for my voice in there. I'm worried that if I contribute, I will send the conversation down a negative path. And sometimes the honest response to that is, you're right. Sometimes the honest response is the thing that you think or the way that you feel about this issue is not going to be constructive to this conversation. It doesn't mean you're wrong. I might think you're wrong, but it doesn't mean that you're wrong. What it means is that we respect each other enough to know when and how to read the room, when and how to address one another. And sometimes, like, what's the thing? Does this need to be said? Does this need to be said now? Does this need to be said now by me? And if we're not just doing internet hot takes, we can take a moment to go through those 3 questions and answer honestly, you know what? Maybe in this conversation right now amongst a group of marginalized people, I, a cishet white dude, can just shut the fuck up. Maybe, even though I disagree, I can just keep that to myself. And this can be a safe place for these people to discuss the things that are on their minds without me intruding on it. Maybe that's okay. And I think that there's, this is the kind of respect, the kind of accountability that I want the world to have. I'm just thrilled to be part of a group of people who are thoughtful and intellectually and emotionally resilient enough to behave that way.
Yeah,
I take no credit for it.
I mean, and I do believe that if you're not in that room would still have the integrity that it does. I don't ever see you not in that room, but I can hypothesize that, like, if Dave, some strange way, and knocking on wood, is not in the room tomorrow, I still expect the room to behave a particular way. And that's not because of the ghost of you, but just because of the, as you say, I think it's Churchill that said it. I hate quoting Churchill, but got some good quotes. We build these rooms, or we build these buildings, and then those buildings build us. It's the context that we're in. It's the water bottle that we're in that influences the way that the water is held. And you earlier said that, a person that is conservative or liberal and everything like that can, at one point, there was a time where you could be able to have these differing opinions and, like I said, go and grab lunch afterwards. And of course, the political scientist in me is obligated to talk about just exactly how that was all ruined with the birth of classical liberalism, the John Lockean liberalism that we understand, not the liberal that we talk about nowadays in the American political system, but liberalism. It was the first ism, the first ideology, this first prepackaged concept that basically people said, okay, I can subscribe to that and I can say that I am that, and that's the end of the interaction that I have to have with it. I don't have to think about the itemized things that a liberal believes. I can just say I'm a liberal, and then that's it. That's the end of the conversation. And a lot of the ways
the thinking is done for you.
Exactly. That's what these ideologies do. That's what these isms do. And before that, people would just read different political philosophers. They would read their Kant, they would read their Thucydides, they would read their Machiavelli, and they would pick different things that they coincide with, and they would become that political body. And a lot of the problem is now, if one person says, I'm a conservative, that's the end of the conversation. And in a lot of ways, yeah, you kind of have to do that. At this point, if a guy came on to like, if I'm in a conversation with someone, especially publicly, unfortunately, and they say, oh, I'm a conservative, that is shorthand to say that I believe particular things. And one of those things could very well mean that I don't believe in someone's existence. And that is a very quick and swift way to just end the conversation. And it's sad that that's what it's become. The question that I like to ask people is, what do you believe in? You know, what is your philosophical underpinnings? What motivates you? What are you passionate about? And it's amazing how far a friendship can be forged with someone without ever discussing the name, saying the word, and just realizing how much you agree with someone without ever saying, oh yeah, I'm a leftist too, or I believe in that. Just actually talking to that person. Now, granted, they can believe some hideous things, but yet again, going back to that Venn diagram, these imaginary circles, the public and the private, I don't care about what you're doing in the private. There's a bunch of things that you're doing in the private that probably I don't like. You know, the type of porn you watch, the relationship that you have with, no, I do care about the relationship that you have with your dog. But I mean, the whole fact of the matter is, there are things in the private that can be left in the private, and we can still have a functional, deep, not only like just surface level, but a deep relationship in the public. And it doesn't necessarily have to go tits up if you get into a conversation and realize that, oh, okay, you think the earth is flat.
As a person who has opinions on everything, I also recognize I don't need to have opinions on everything. It is totally okay and valid for me to go, yeah, I don't know on that one. Even when asked directly, what do you think about this? I don't know. I'm I'm hesitant to name any, but there are certainly political and social issues right now where I look really hard at both sides of the line, and I'm like, I see where you're both coming from. I don't know that I fully agree with either position here. I think that it's more nuanced than that. I also don't know how to say that without both sides being mad at me. And I wish that there were room for that. I wish there were room for me to say, hey, I'm not as well versed in this thing. Help me understand your perspective without it being an awkward conversation. I remember years ago walking down the street in New York City, and there was a sticker on a light pole that said, "Stop telling women to smile." And I was walking with friends, and I laughed. I'm like, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with, like, brighten somebody's day or whatever? And then they're like, well, the reason is because it's like you telling a woman what to do, and, sort of like taking away her agency of her mood, or saying that she owes you a signal of being in a better mood, or whatever the thing is. And I'm like, oh. And I realized in that moment, like, I'm clearly unprepared for an argument on this subject. I have no strong opinion. I will, take what might feel like an L in this moment and process it. And over time, as like that conversation plays in my head on a loop, I think like, oh, I start to understand. And then I see situations, I see moments play out in real life, or I hear people share their experiences, and I go back to that moment in my head, and I start to contextualize the sticker differently. And I start to see through that other lens. It's not that in that moment somebody said, you are wrong and here's why. And I said, good point, I am wrong and I will never think that again. It's that moment of non-confrontation, just sort of like stating a fact dispassionately, or even a little bit passionately, but not, there's a way to say that opinion may not be as well reasoned as you would hope. And here's why a different alternative opinion might be a better place for you to end up. It is possible to say that without saying, you're an awful shitbird person and everyone should hate you and never buy anything or employ you ever again. Those are like wildly different ends of a spectrum. I worry that we are so frequent to go to the you said bad thing, you are now bad end of the spectrum. We don't give people room to grow. That doesn't mean we should forgive everything. And I like, even saying that much out loud feels like I'm trying to excuse something or make room for these things. It's really just about How do we give people enough room to grow? What can we do with these platforms that we have, with these relationships that we have with audiences and with other creators and the voices that we have? What can we do to foster more of that conversation, more of that nuance?
Yeah, no, and I agree, and I think that what we're beginning to do now is kind of at least beginning the discussion on it, just a little bit more honesty and showing the scars, showing the ugly parts of the journey, because what you went on right there was a journey. You noticed something that conflicted with your worldview, you addressed your worldview, someone else checked you on it, and then it didn't end there. That's the point. That's the big point. Like, it didn't stop right there. Your mind wasn't changed, because that's not how minds work. You're gonna have this defensive mechanism that you're gonna try to combat it, and over time, maybe with new evidence emerging, you may come to a conclusion that says, I'm encountering new evidence that will make me think a different way, and I need to accept that. And I think that there's different ways that people channel that type of inner dialogue. Some people have the dissonance and they say, well, no, I believe this. I've believed it from I was born. My dad believed it, and his dad also believed it. Therefore, it must be right. It stood the test of time. It's a classic take. And the whole problem with that is that you're never going to allow for the people, even when you're presented with that evidence, you're not going to allow for any type of change to happen. And I find that that's like a lot of the times, like, people don't like to take the L's, and I think we need to stop necessarily calling it L's, and more so, or change what L means. This is going to sound trite too, but yeah, maybe it's a lesson. Maybe maybe L stands for something different. And make it a little bit more palatable. Sometimes you need it to be hard. Sometimes someone needs to be, force-fed the L. But hopefully we get to a point like where, and like I said, more public interpretation or more public consumption of differing opinions and showing that process, I think, is going to help us. That's the reason why, like, I'm very committed to showing my trek on the spectrum of being progressive, or this trek from being a conservative Caribbean man to a progressive person that is trying to exemplify that for others. It's something that's been difficult. It's something that's come back to bite me. I mean, making that Caribbean homophobia video, like, I've lost friends and family members because of it. They just said, wait, you think that the gays don't deserve fire and brimstone? I'm like, no, I think that they're people. I think that they ought live. I think that they ought be miserable in relationships just like the rest of us. And and that is a controversial take for some people, and then they feel as though they can't associate with you. And I said, okay, well, you know what? If this is what the ostracization feels like from friends and family, if that's what it feels like, I can only imagine what people that are actually queer are going through with their family and friends, and the fact that a lot of them may have to even flee the country that they were local to because they can't be themselves. And yeah, it goes right back to virtue signaling. If I didn't signal that, then maybe these conversations would have never happened. Maybe the commenters that commented on that video and said, hey, I'm from Jamaica. I left when I was 16. I went to Canada because I felt as though I couldn't be myself there. And now, knowing that you, a Caribbean man that sees my humanity, exists, I feel like I can go home. If I didn't do that video, if I caved to the craven knee-jerk reaction of my dad texting me and saying, didn't you want to study law? Like, what are you doing? Why are you making these videos on the internet about, like, you laying your discrepancies asunder and whatnot? And I said, you know what? I feel like I wanted to just change lives. And if I'm not doing that with law and instead doing that with a 15-minute video, I'm still doing the same thing. I'm still completing the mission. And then you talk to legal, and he tells you, well, hey, I make more money doing this than actually being a lawyer. So, hey.
All right, going all the way back. The thought I have around the tweet comes down to this. and this is the most nuanced approach I can take, I think. I think that the way that internet I'm going to use some words, right? The way that people who are very publicly liberal intellectuals on the internet might use the word racism may differ from the people, the way that word is used or defined by the people who are described in that tweet. And I think that the sort of person, or not even described, but the people who would take issue, or the people who are on the other side, if there's another side of that issue, it's not that they disagree, I don't think. I think that it is simply two groups of people using a word differently. And the challenge I would offer is that the definition of racism only applying in this narrow set of circumstances, there are groups of people for whom it is easy for that definition to exclude things that they experienced or they feel. And it's not that your approach or the sentiment of what you're trying to accomplish is invalid. Definitely not saying that. Not even saying you're wrong. I think that you're using the same word in two different languages, and that dissonance will cause extra friction. Because that's what's happening in my head. I'm reading this, I'm like, what is he talking about? Of course, like racism just means, doing bad things to a different person because of their race. Like that can happen in any direction. But I'm using like a common dictionary definition of a word when you're applying much more, a more academic approach to it, which I think is valid. And I think that dissecting these things and looking where they come from and how the systems are built is super useful. I don't have a, here's what you should do. I don't have a do things differently. I guess all I can offer there is, I think I see why my initial reaction to that was what it was. And I think that the gap that can be bridged there is, a reconciliation of those two languages.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you were brave enough to have this discourse visually, like visually,
hey, I'm so brave to have you on my show where I get to edit whatever is said.
Well, that too, but still, even the optics of it, a lot of people would shy away from it just because of the mere nature of it. But I think that just showing this is very helpful for like a lot of people. And I think we need to show the inner workings of our head more often if we're trying to set standards, no pun intended, for this type of thing. I think that what you're doing right now is what more of our creators or more people online, because I mean, people creating tweets are also creators. But that's a semantic discussion for another day. And I think that if they maybe did more twit threads like Thomas Frank and said,
don't encourage people to use Twitter the way Thomas does. Nobody needs to do that. Nobody needs 15 tweet threads. Oh my God. He's a human listicle. He's a human BuzzFeed article.
He's nuance is what he is. He extends, he pushes beyond the margins of Twitter and he disobeys how it's supposed to be used. I'm a Thomas Frank stan. And he's also,
I love Thomas. I love that guy to death. I wish he'd shut up on Twitter.
Anytime when I see the little spaghetti scroll thread thing, I just scroll past it. I said, no, this is long.
It's not even that I disagree with anything he says. I just find the construct annoying. And so I'll pick on Thomas any chance I get.
I think you hate threads in general because you also hate Slack threads.
No, I like Slack threads. I hate that they're used as replies. I wish Slack had a replies mechanism. And this is a great example, maybe the best example in the universe of how Twitter conversation nuance can be lost. Because I tried to make a point about how Slack threads get misused, and people, including whoever runs the Slack social media accounts, thought that I just hated threads indiscriminately. And like, no, threads could be useful. I'm like, I'm not set, like, I don't know.
Imagine getting canceled over Slack threads.
Let me pick the most ridiculous example. It's like we're talking about guns, and I'm saying like we should learn to have better gun control, and the jump is to, well, look at all these ways you can use a gun. And I'm like, sure, but most people aren't doing that. We got this whole other problem. Not that I'm comparing Slack threads to school shootings. My point is that in conversation, nuance can get lost very quickly. And I just wish that I'd had, if I'd known then what I know now, I would have approached the Slack thread Twitter discussion differently, because I spent more of my time trying to clarify what I meant than I did. If I just like said Slack threads as replies are garbage, give us replies, probably would have gotten further. So there's a lesson, kids. Think about what you say on the internet before you say it. Think through all of the ways in which a person could take this wrong, and then re-say it. Save the drafts, wait a day. That's my advice.
That's the gun content that people were asking for on Nebula, right there.
Nuanced comparisons to school shootings and Slack threads. Well, at least this is at the end of the show, so nobody's going to hear it. Yikes. You know what? You know what we should do? Let's just not air this, and we'll try again in a couple of weeks.
Oh God, no. we're just gonna next call that we do, we're just gonna record that, and then we'll air that one, of course.
Yeah.
As much as I love talking to you.
We should just we'll just record 100 more of these and splice them all together. All right, we do need to do another one in person when you're up here again. Let's make sure that there's a sequel to this. Peter, where can people find you on the interwebs?
My favorite place for you to find me is nebula.tv/foreignman. My second place is, of course, youtube.com/foreignman in the foreign land. Then, of course, you have like twitter.com and TikTok, foreignman242, where you can get my daily musings and also my feet after they're pedicured occasionally.
If anything gets you canceled, it's going to be your feet. Or if anything gets canceled, it gets me canceled, it'll be my comments about your feet.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's my pivot point. After, I'm done making educational content, I'm making foot content. I've heard that I have a career in feet.